41 years ago, I witnessed not only the death of my classmates here, but also the death of a promise I had grown to believe in, the American dream. I grew up saluting the flag, pledging allegiance to a nation whose Constitution guaranteed the rights to every citizen to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When I came to Kent State, I wanted nothing more than to be a teacher, to be a good citizen, to live a meaningful life, to be successful in a nation where I was led to believe that anything is possible if you work hard and you play by the rules. But what my school and my college textbooks never taught me about America was that the rules in our country don't apply to everyone. Most certainly, as we see more and more today, not to the powerful and the privileged. I came to college with no clue about the extent to which the rich and the powerful in America were shaping our future and were securing control of any avenue through which anyone might stand in the way of policies that are now seen as among the most sinister in the world. The most valuable lessons of my life were learned not in classrooms and textbooks, but anywhere that students on this campus gathered to talk about the world around us. A world where, if you took the time to really see what was happening, and that includes today, was the antithesis of what we've been taught was waiting for us. I feel lucky to have been part of the Woodstock generation and to be one of countless young Americans who willingly set aside our personal dreams for the future when we faced the grim reality that there might not be a future for ourselves or for anyone if we did not do something now to ensure it. In 1970, our one nation under God did not seem so indivisible when our government leaders did all they could to keep us divided. Young versus old, black versus white, straight versus gay, jocks and hippies, liberals, conservatives, and at Kent State, students versus armed Ohio National Guardsmen. That orchestrated alienation of American students from the military machine that was drafting our generation into an unnecessary and unjust war was heightened when, during peaceful protests against the war, we were called bums by the President of the United States. We were likened to Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan by the Vice President. And as our protests grew and our voices actually began to turn public opinion against the war in Vietnam, Governor Ronald Reagan in California warned, if these students want a bloodbath, let's get it over with. Within weeks, when the Vietnam War escalated into Cambodia, Governor Rhodes called student anti-war protesters at Kent State the worst type of people we harbor in America. It's over with in Ohio, he said, as you heard of the chronology today. We're not going to treat the symptoms, we're going to eradicate the problem. And we were too young and too naive to even grasp the danger of these inflammatory words at every levels of our government. 3 days later, active, bright, idealistic youth on this campus joined students across the nation and around the world to demand an end to the now known immoral war in Southeast Asia. The problem was our effectiveness. And that problem was indeed eradicated for President Nixon by Governor Rhodes with an order to fire into a crowd of unarmed college students, killing 4 and wounding 9 others, including my brother and our friends. My generation grew up inspired by people like John F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., who dared, as we did, to dream of a better America, who dared to change the direction our nation was heading, only to see these giants killed for the real and profound impact they too might have had on the issues that should matter in America. Issues like civil rights, human rights, racial equality, economic opportunity, education, health care, affordable housing, clean air and water, safe food, peace with the nations of the world. Here at Kent State in 1970 and throughout our nation, we are learning that none of these issues matter more than the profits of the most wealthy and the most selfish among us in this nation. Less than tragedy, Thomas Jefferson, who crafted the Constitution that guaranteed our right to dissent here, warned our young nation of its greatest threat to democracy with these prophetic words. He said, "I hope that we shall crush in its birth the aristocracy of our moneyed corporations, which dare already to challenge our government to a trial of strength and to bid defiance to the laws of our country." Echoing Jefferson's warning, Republican President Dwight Eisenhower, 9 years before the shootings here, warned us all in America about what he feared was the dangerous rise of corporate power in our nation, as he pondered just how ominous it might be if America's massive military establishment were to join hands with a large arms industry and learn just how profitable war can be. Here's what Eisenhower said. "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." Eisenhower worried, simply, that the cost of war might divert money from critical areas in our nation, like hospitals and schools. Eisenhower, a 5-star general, had seen the horror and the human consequence of war, and he called on Americans to learn how to solve our differences, not with arms, but with intellect and direct purpose. Another quote from Eisenhower, "The jet plane," he said, "that roars overhead costs $750,000. That's more than a man will make in his lifetime." And he asked, "What world can afford this kind of thing for long?" One might only look at the world economy today to find the answers to Eisenhower's haunting question. What world can afford this kind of thing for too long? No world, and certainly not ours. These insightful, intelligent, prophetic words were uttered in what has proven now to be the words of one of the last U.S. presidents whose office or whose Congress is not purchased and controlled by corporations that spend millions to put into office only those who will protect the existence of the corporate world and assure their continued riches, with never-ending military occupations and wars throughout the world. Their bottom line every day is met with expendable human capital, the bodies of American soldiers, and those that these young people are pitted against in a cruel game waged for profit and greed. Are we not ashamed? Jefferson's promise of an American government of the people, by the people, and for the people is a cruel joke on anyone who still believes we actually have any say in the decision-making. How did we let this happen? Before 1961, companies like Ford in America built cars and bombers. But in peacetime, they just built cars. Not as profitable, but profitable enough. And all that changed after the Korean War, when American corporations convinced Congress to ignore Eisenhower's warning and allow America to create a large and growing standing army. The fear-mongering that began in the McCarthy years and that we've seen escalate to unfathomable heights in the last decade provides assurance to corporate America that we, the people, will be quiet and will be compliant with America's new profit-generating domestic and foreign policy. It's greed run amok in America. And to understand the filthy rich who created the present condition of our economy and our political standing in the world, one needs only to consider the words of Dennis Kozlowski, the CEO who looted the $600 million pension fund of his hard workers at Tyco. When on the stand at his trial, he explained his conduct simply as, "The more I had, the more I wanted." Today, even Defense Secretary Robert Gates admits that the number of warships we have and are building in America are far beyond our capacity to use them. The current U.S. battle fleet, he says, is larger than America's next future 13 navies combined. And even while we produce more weaponry than we can use, 11 of those 13 can't use them now. Fleets are being built not for us, but for our partners and our allies abroad. So how vulnerable are we truly if in less than 8 years from now, our small nation, surrounded by water, will have 20 times more advanced stealth fighters than China. In America, there are only a handful of defense contractors, so shopping for the lowest and best prices isn't an option when we go to war. Contracts only go to the high bidders. Think about that. Just think about that the next time you look at your paycheck and you see the deduction of your tax dollars. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman are deep into the pockets of both Democrats and Republicans who routinely vote to fund the wars they create for the benefit of contractors like Halliburton and Kellogg Brown and Root, who made billions ripping us off in Iraq. Egypt's been the second largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid for decades. Mubarak's American-backed empire has gotten $2 billion a year, mostly for their military. And where do our tax dollars go when they go to Egypt? Not to the people of Egypt that you recently saw in the streets, but right back into the pockets of U.S. corporations who sell weapons to sustain that country's dictatorships. And how do we know this? Certainly not from our corporate-owned media, but from the people of Egypt themselves. In February, the people of Egypt poured into the streets of Cairo, holding signs that said, "To America, from the Egyptian people, stop supporting Mubarak." More than 2 million young Egyptians rallied in Tahrir Square in a peaceful and spontaneous uprising that was unlike anything we've seen in recent years. In Egypt, a majority of its 80 million citizens are young, like these college students here at Kent State today, using Twitter, Facebook, text messaging, cell phones. This new generation of activists linked up successfully to oppose a U.S.-supported dictatorship that has survived 3 decades. Okay, survived 3 decades, that is, with our corporate help. $2 billion American dollars each year goes to Egypt, comes back to companies like Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics for F-6 aircrafts, for M1 tanks, for aircraft engines, missiles, and guns. Our tax dollars sent to Egypt also comes back to a U.S. company called Combined Systems. Look them up. They manufacture the tear gas canisters that were used against the Egyptian students in the streets of Cairo. What the young Egyptians are saying to us in their text messages and Twitter messages is that Mubarak's and other corrupt dictatorships around the world can only survive as long as we, the American people, allow corporate America to exploit and oppress them. That is our job. Not surprisingly, it was U.S. and European corporations that assisted Mubarak in shutting down the internet and the cell phone services in Egypt, plunging their people into darkness to stop their righteous protests. The rich get richer in America, with tax havens abroad, bank bailouts, and the ability to fund 8 lobbyists for every 1 congressional seat to ensure a self-perpetuating war machine and continued war profits. And the fallout from this sick, corrupt marriage between war planners and weapons makers is what you see and feel throughout America and throughout the world today. And it's likely what brought you to this room today and led you to stay as long as you did. Because you know in your heart and in your gut that something is wrong in America. While we waste $700 million a day to pay for never-ending wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, America's teachers, firefighters, and police are losing their jobs. About the rise of poverty, the decline of education, the expansion of gang violence on the streets while our police forces dwindle. What's also increasing, if you haven't noticed, is the number of gated communities they build to protect them from the conditions they are creating for the rest of us. The wages of corporate America rose as much as 20% in the last decade, and so did their pharmaceutical, healthcare, oil profits, war profits. While we, the American people, and the people of the world endure higher gas prices, higher utility costs, food prices, healthcare costs, tuition rates, and increasingly reduced wages and job losses. 1 in 6 Americans now cannot find work, and with massive layoffs in bankrupt states throughout the nation, that deplorable statistic is worsening. Here at home, while the rich get richer, our corporate purchase Congress extends and increases tax breaks to the wealthiest among us and slashes basic assistance programs for the poor, for children, the elderly, and turns their backs on 3 million people pushed from their homes by foreclosures and bank repossessions. Unconscionable.
Eat the rich, feed the poor.
Abroad, America's wars have taken hundreds of thousands of lives. We've maimed and crippled countless others. Our occupation in the Middle East and our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have destroyed America's once heralded image as the world's peacemaker. We're fueling the very terrorism we seek to defeat by ensuring a cycle of death and profit. So like Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan are, by design, unwinnable. The sooner we leave Iraq and Afghanistan, the safer we'll be. And that will only happen. That will only happen when we, the people, move our nation from a culture of war and greed to a culture of resistance to it. We must join with the people of the world to put a stop to war and to the political influence of the corporate war machine itself. We will not end the slaughter of innocent people until we're willing to rise up as we did here in 1970. And we can find inspiration in the actions of those who are already doing it. State workers in Columbus, Ohio, Madison, Wisconsin, and citizens in streets of the Arab capitals have engaged in repeated and sustained acts of civil disobedience this year with demands for basic domestic services and human rights for all. On March 19th, there's more. And it's inspiring. On March 19th, the 9th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, a coalition of U.S. military veterans who served in Iraq and Vietnam gathered at Lafayette Park across from the White House and endured numerous arrests in anti-war protests and in protest of America's deplorable treatment of its veterans. That's patriotism. Contrary to the fabricated belief that America is so different, as George Bush so stupidly suggested, they hate us for our freedom. Our political system is as broken and dysfunctional as the one presided over in Egypt by Hosni Mubarak. In 1970, we put our bodies on the line to protest America's screwed up priorities and to stop America's war machine in Southeast Asia. When we were gunned down on our campus, students throughout the country and throughout the world stood in solidarity with us, streaming into the streets in protest. 750 college campuses shut down on May 5th. Nixon's aides called the days after Kent State the darkest of his presidency. He was forced by the actions of American students to withdraw troops from Vietnam. And today, students throughout the Middle East are being gunned down to silence their similar cries for democracy. Students at Kent State and throughout the nation must wage massive protests in opposition to the very tactics that ended in tragedy here at Kent State. We must stand in solidarity with the poor and oppressed people of the world. We must initiate wide-scale actions in support of their protests and against the U.S.-backed dictatorships in Tunisia, in Yemen, in Jordan, Egypt, and Libya. These are the areas where anti-U.S. sentiments broil among the most weak and disenfranchised people who are given no voice against the tyrants we arm and keep in power. And George W. Bush wanted us to think they simply hate us for our freedom. Let's show the world we are not that stupid. Just imagine if the people of these Arab nations see American people standing in support of their cries for democracy. We can do more to fight terrorism in the world by standing up against our own acts of terrorism abroad. We can do this. What would America have us believe as they pay their disciples like Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck to tell us that patriotism is merely flag-waving compliance with government policy, but true patriotism is the one that we don't see. Like a helicopter pilot named Hugh Thompson in Vietnam, who jumped from his plane and stood between American soldiers and villagers in My Lai to prevent more deaths in that unjust massacre done in America's name. That's patriotism. Bradley Manning's uploading of thousands of documents and videos to WikiLeaks confirms U.S. complicity in torture and war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. Manning's documents confirm that America forces are routinely killing civilians in Iraq, in Pakistan, including children, and these war crimes are not being investigated. Manning is a true American patriot. He's in solitary confinement for it. Nearly 3 weeks ago, on April 15th, while ordinary Americans paid their fair share and corporate Americans paid no taxes, protesters picketed at the Union Square branch of Bank of America in New York, crying out against the loss of trillions of dollars in our nation's treasury due to their corporate influence abroad. Today, 10 major banks control 60% of the economy. Bank of America, the biggest and the worst of them, paid zero. No federal taxes last year or the year before, even while they seized record-breaking numbers of homes from those they robbed and tossed helpless, jobless people into the streets. One group of patriots alone carried out 50 protests in February outside Bank of America branches throughout America. That was on February 26th, and I'm inspired by these people, by their actions and by the American patriots, like the 80,000 young people who marched to Wisconsin's Capitol in Madison to protest the corrupt policies of Republican Governor Scott Walker, who seeks to destroy the state's public employee unions. We should all be inspired by them and by the 10,000 people who marched in Columbus to oppose similar anti-union policies by Republican Governor John Kasich. It's here in Ohio, it's here at Penn State where the blood of students was spilled. So it's here at Penn State that students must pay attention to, must support, and must join these critical movements for peace, for justice, and for equality. It is here at Penn State that students must model the kind of activism that can and will make a difference at home and abroad. Because as you know, May 4th is not just about Allison and Jeff and Sandy and Bill. It's not about me or you. It's about Americans. It's about each and every one of us and the power that we have to change the world. In honor of our fallen martyrs at Kent State, let's join in solidarity with the people of Egypt, Syria, Tunisia, Iraq, Afghanistan. For as long as our tanks and our aircraft and our tear gas canisters arrive in their nations with a Made in the USA stamp on them, we are complicit in their oppression. Here in America and throughout the world, we must put our bodies in the way of the war machine and send a clear message to corporate America. This is not the America our forefathers intended. It is not the democracy Jefferson promised and warned us we could lose. It is indeed the military-industrial complex Eisenhower feared we might become, and we must use every means that is left to us to stop it in its tracks. And that is our challenge today. That is our challenge in the days and weeks ahead as we see the people of the world call out to us for help in ending America's occupation in their nations and the exploitation of their people. So let's send a clear message from Kent State to the people of the world, similar to the message that was on the sign of one protester in Egypt at a rally in Cairo that read, "Egypt supports Wisconsin workers." One